Denver, Colorado, a Tuesday evening in December. A notification lights up the dark elevator and my heart stops. It isn't a threat from a stranger, but a photo from the people who share my blood. The dining table is full, the roast is carved, and there is no empty chair for me. My name is Chloe Greene, and I was raised to believe family means sacrifice. But when the second email arrived, demanding $30,000 for a truck I never drove, I realized I was the only one paying the price. So I didn't get mad. I bought their debt. Stick around to hear how I turn the tables. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We always appreciate the time you spent here with us. Let's get into the story. The elevator in my Denver high-rise hummed with that specific pressurized silence you only notice when you are exhausted. I shifted the weight of 3 reusable grocery bags to my left hand, my right thumb hovering over my phone screen. It was 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and my eyes still burned from staring at lines of code during a 10-hour shift at the cybersecurity firm where I managed incident responses. I was tired, hungry, and just wanted to heat up a meal and zone out. But the phone in my hand lit up, vibrating against my palm with a notification from the one group chat I kept permanently muted. It was the family chat. I shouldn't have looked. I should have let it slide into the digital void until morning. But the reflex was too strong, conditioned by years of responding to every crisis my parents manufactured. I unlocked the screen and felt the air leave my lungs as if the elevator cables had snapped. It was a photo. Just one image, high resolution, bright and festive. It showed my parents, Eric and Patty Greene, smiling widely at the head of the dining table in our childhood home in Cedar Ridge, Oregon. My younger brother Ryan was seated to my father's right, holding a beer, looking flushed and happy. Aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the rest of the frame, a sea of flannel and holiday sweaters. The table was groaning under the weight of the roast, the green bean casserole, and the good china that Mom only brought out for special occasions. The caption underneath, written by my mother, read, "First Christmas with the whole family back together." I stared at those words until they blurred. Whole family. They used that phrase as if I had already been erased from existence. I zoomed in on the image, looking for a gap, a space, a single symbolic empty chair that might suggest they missed me. There was nothing. Every seat was taken. Someone was sitting in my old spot near the window. My grandmother's antique centerpiece, the one I used to polish every December, was perfectly centered. There was no extra place setting, no glass of wine left out for the daughter living 2 states away. The table was full, complete. It had been 2 years since I'd set foot in that dining room, not because I didn't want to go home, but because after the last argument about money, my parents told me they needed a break from the drama. Apparently, the break was permanent, and the definition of family had been rewritten to exclude only me. The elevator chimed, signaling the parking garage level, and the doors slid open. Before I could even step out into the cold concrete air, a second notification pinged. This one wasn't a text. It was an email forwarded directly from my father. The subject line hit me harder than the photo had: FWD delinquent auto loan, $32,800 due. I froze in the doorway, blocking the sensor, forcing the doors to bounce back open. I opened the email. It was a formal demand letter from a lender attached as a PDF. The document detailed a lifted black pickup truck, a vehicle I knew Ryan had been drooling over for months. The primary borrower was listed as Ryan Greene. The co-signer was Eric Greene. The status was bold and read repossession pending. My father had added a short note to the top of the forward brief and commanding, as if I were a subordinate employee rather than his estranged daughter. Handle this before the end of the month. Don't make your mother stress. That was it. No hello, no Merry Christmas. No explanation for why I wasn't in the photo. Just a demand for $32,000 to save a truck I had never seen for a brother who was currently drinking beer at a party I wasn't invited to. I walked to my car, a sensible 4-door sedan I'd paid off 3 years early, and drove the short distance to my apartment. It was a modest place, tidy and quiet. I had built this life, brick by brick, paying off my student loans by living on ramen and working overtime, building an emergency fund because I knew deep down that no one was coming to save me if I fell. As I unpacked my groceries in the silent kitchen, the anger didn't flare up hot. It settled cold and heavy in my chest. This was the pattern. It had always been the pattern. I remembered being 17 working double shifts at the diner while my friends shopped for prom dresses, just so I could hand over my tips to help pay for Ryan's travel baseball team fees. I remembered the acceptance letter from my dream university, the one I hid in a drawer, because my parents sat me down and explained that if I went to the state school instead, they could afford to lease a better car for the family, which really meant for Ryan. I remembered the time I co-signed for Ryan's community college tuition, a loan he swore he'd pay only for him to drop out 3 weeks later. I paid every cent of that debt over the next 5 years. I was raised to believe that family means you sacrifice. It was the Greene family motto. I just didn't realize until tonight that it meant only I sacrificed while everyone else feasted. My phone buzzed again on the counter. This time it was a direct text from Ryan. He must have known Dad sent the email. The message popped up. "Just cover it, Chloe. Dad's freaking out. It's not like you can't afford it. Don't threaten the family over a truck." I stared at the word threaten. That was their magic trick. They flipped the script so fast it made you dizzy. I wasn't the one who bought a truck I couldn't afford. I wasn't the one who missed 3 payments. But by refusing to pay, I became the threat. I became the weapon aimed at the family's stability. I looked at the Christmas photo again, then at the loan demand. The juxtaposition was nauseating. They could erase me from the table, pretend I didn't exist when it came to love and celebration. But they made sure to keep my bank account on the hook. They wanted me to be invisible at the dinner party, but present at the bank teller. My internal monologue sharpened a voice I usually suppressed rising to the surface. You don't get to erase me and still draft my life like a credit line. I sat down at my desk and woke up my computer. The screens glowed to life, bathing the dark living room in blue light. I pulled up the bank's name from the PDF. It was a mid-sized lender, one my firm had actually investigated for security vulnerabilities a year ago. I knew their systems. I knew how they bundled debt. I knew how they operated. I opened the loan file thinking I'd finally do what my parents raised me to do, fix it. What I found instead made me decide to burn the whole pattern down. I pulled the PDF onto my main monitor and went to work treating the loan document not like a family crisis, but like a corrupted file in a security audit. My eyes scanned the metadata and the fine print with the practiced efficiency of a decade in incident response. I was looking for my name. I zoomed in on the signature block at the bottom of page 4. There was Ryan's signature, a jagged scrawl that looked like he'd signed it on a dashboard while driving. Below that was my father's signature, tight and precise. I scrolled back up to the borrower information. Primary borrower, Ryan Greene. Co-borrower, Eric Greene. I ran a text search for Chloe throughout the entire 30-page document. The result came back instantly, 0 matches found. I sat back in my chair, the synthetic leather creaking in the silence of my apartment. I wasn't on the loan. I had never authorized a credit check. I had never signed a single piece of paper. Legally, this debt had absolutely nothing to do with me. Yet I knew exactly why they had sent it. In families like mine, and in thousands of middle-class households across the country, there is a role that doesn't exist on any census form or tax return: the informal guarantor. It's the child who gets good grades, the one who saves money, the one who is designated as the backup generator for the family's power failures. I remembered a conversation from years ago, right after I'd landed my first real job. My parents had sat me down beaming with what I thought was pride, until my father said, "If anything ever happens, we know we can count on you, Chloe. You're strong." At the time I preened under the praise. Now, staring at a $32,000 demand for a truck I'd never ridden in, I understood the translation. They didn't mean I was strong. They meant I was the one they could use. The realization unlocked a vault of memories I usually kept sealed. I thought about the time Ryan got drunk and totaled his first car, a Honda Civic my parents had bought him for his 16th birthday. I had suggested foolishly that maybe he should take the bus for a while to learn a lesson. My mother had turned on me with a ferocity that stunned me. She told me I was jealous that I was trying to erase my brother's potential because I was bitter. They threatened to cut off the small stipend they were giving me for textbooks if I didn't be nice and support him. It was a recurring motif in my life. Every major milestone I achieved was ambushed by a sudden frantic need for money or favors. The week I moved into my college dorm, Dad needed $500 for a billing error. The day I signed the lease on my first apartment, Mom called crying because Ryan needed bail money for a misunderstanding. I had been trained like a dog to respond to the whistle of their incompetence with my checkbook. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I opened a blank email draft and started typing, letting the raw, unfiltered hurt pour out. You erased me from Christmas, but you still sent me the bill. I am not your silent cosigner anymore. I am not the insurance policy you cash in when Ryan screws up. Do not contact me about this again. I stared at the words. They were true. They were necessary. And I knew I would never send them. It was too emotional, too vulnerable. It gave them too much surface area to attack. I saved the draft into a folder I mentally labeled First Draft of a Spine and deleted the text from the active window. I needed to be sure. I picked up my phone and dialed the customer service number for the bank listed on the loan, navigating the automated menu until I reached a human being. I gave them the loan number and asked a simple question. Is Chloe Greene listed as a responsible party on this note? The representative, a tired-sounding woman named Brenda, put me on hold for 2 minutes. When she came back, her voice was definitive. No, ma'am. We have no record of that name associated with this account. I asked her what happens if the loan isn't paid. She went into a rehearsed script about repossession and collections, explaining that after a certain period of delinquency, the bank bundles these bad debts and sells them to third-party portfolio managers. That piece of information hit me like an electric shock. I worked in cybersecurity. I knew how data moved. I knew that bad debt wasn't just a failure, it was a commodity. My firm had once partnered with a debt purchasing company based in Phoenix to secure their transfer protocols. I knew exactly how these portfolios were bought and sold for pennies on the dollar. A dangerous, jagged idea began to form in the back of my mind. It felt wrong, almost taboo, but it also felt cleaner than anything my family had done to me in years. What if I stopped being their invisible guarantor, the one who pays secretly to keep up appearances, and became their visible creditor? I shook the thought away, trying to stick to the high road. I needed to set a boundary, a hard legal line. I opened a new email to my parents. I kept it clinical, stripping away every ounce of emotion. I have reviewed the document. I am not listed as a borrower or a cosigner. I did not sign this contract. I will not pay this balance. Do not send me bills for debts I did not incur. I read it over. It felt unnatural to write to my parents without softening the blow, without adding a "love you but" or a "I wish I could help." But the photo of that Christmas table flashed in my mind. They hadn't softened the blow of erasing me. I hit send. The reply popped up almost instantly, as if my father had been sitting at his computer waiting for me to capitulate. It wasn't an argument about the loan terms. It wasn't a plea. It was a verdict. If you won't act like family, don't expect to be treated like one. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes. He meant it as a threat, the ultimate leverage he had always used to keep me in line. But as I read the words again, the fear didn't come. Instead, a cold calm settled over me. They didn't realize I finally believed them. 2 years ago, I established a limited liability company called Frontier Signal. On paper, it was a legitimate consultancy firm I used for freelance penetration testing and security audits, a tax-efficient container for my side income. It had a registered agent, a business bank account, and an encrypted email domain. To the outside world, it was a faceless corporate entity. To me, it was just a file drawer in my home office. But as I stared at my father's threat, I realized Frontier Signal was about to become something else entirely, a weapon. I opened a secure messaging client and found the contact for Colin Wade. Colin was a portfolio manager at a debt-buying firm in Phoenix, a man I'd helped secure a few server nodes for back when his company was suffering a DDoS attack. We weren't friends, but we traded on professional favors. I typed a message that felt less like a query and more like loading a gun. Colin, if you ever buy auto loan tranches from Ridgeway Community Bank in Oregon, I'm interested in one specific account. Keep it off the general ledger. I typed in the loan number, hit enter, and closed the laptop. I couldn't sit still in the apartment anymore. The air felt thin, recycled, charged with the static of what I had just set in motion. I put on my coat and walked out into the Denver night. The city was cold, the kind of dry mountain chill that sharpens your senses. I walked past the trendy bistros and the darkened storefronts, wrestling with the American duality of my upbringing. On one hand, I believed in the brutal fairness of the system. You sign the paper, you owe the money. Actions have consequences. It was the code I lived by, the code that got me out of debt and into a high-rise. But underneath that was the other voice, the one conditioned by church potlucks and small-town whispers. The voice that said family is a fortress, and you don't air your dirty laundry, and you certainly don't let the walls breach. I asked myself if I was doing this because I needed to be safe from their financial parasitism, or if I was doing it because I wanted them to feel cornered exactly the way I felt every time they ambushed me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the thought. Then it buzzed again, and again. The barrage had started. I stopped under a streetlight and pulled it out. The texts were scrolling in a rapid-fire guilt trip. My mother, Patty. We raised you better than this. We sacrificed so much for you so you could have that fancy job. How can you turn your back on us? My father, Eric. If that truck is repossessed, you will have destroyed this family. You are choosing money over blood. And then Ryan. You're trying to erase me because your jealous dad actually loves me. You think you're better than us just because you left. I stood there reading the word sacrificed over and over. They love that word. But they only ever used it to describe what they did, never what I did. They never called my tuition payments a sacrifice. They never called my silence a sacrifice. I didn't reply. I walked home, the cold hardening my resolve into something brittle but unbreakable. When I got back to my apartment, the red light on my router was blinking. An email had arrived from Colin. I sat down without taking off my coat. The subject line was simply, inventory match. The body of the email was brief. His firm had just purchased a distressed asset portfolio from Ridgeway that morning. Included in the bundle was the note for a 2023 Chevrolet Silverado borrower, Ryan Greene. Because the loan was considered toxic due to the imminent repossession status, Colin's firm had picked it up for pennies on the dollar. He offered to flip the note to Frontier Signal LLC for the acquisition price plus a small handling fee. I stared at the number on the screen. It was less than 15% of the $32,000 my father demanded I pay. For a few $1,000s in amount I could easily cover from my savings without flinching, I had two choices. I could buy the debt and forgive it, effectively paying the bank and saving my parents again. I could be the hero who fixes the mess and gets ignored at the next Christmas dinner. Or I could hold the paper. I could become the legal owner of their mistake and force them to face the reality they had been dodging for decades. I went to the kitchen table and opened a physical notebook. I needed to see it in ink. I drew a line down the center of the page. On the left, I wrote, "Save them again." Underneath, I listed the probable outcome: access to the family, fake peace, more manipulation, more invoices, another Christmas where I am a wallet, not a daughter. On the right, I wrote, "Let them fall." Underneath, I wrote, "Shame, tension, likely no family contact, freedom." I looked at the list. It was brutal math. They hadn't invited me to a single holiday graduation or barbecue in 3 years, unless something was broken or unpaid. They had already made the choice to cut me out. They just hadn't expected me to cut back. I went back to the computer. I opened the purchase agreement Colin had attached. Where it asked for the purchaser's signature, I didn't type my name. I typed Managing Member Frontier Signal LLC. My heart hammered against my ribs, a physical thudding that echoed in my ears. This was the crossing of the Rubicon. Once I clicked execute, the debt wasn't just a number anymore. It was property. My property. I clicked the button. The screen flashed a green confirmation banner. Transfer complete. Frontier Signal LLC now holds note number 847 Green Auto. I sat back, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving me exhausted. I didn't just decline to save them. I chose to be the one holding the net when they finally stopped falling upward. I closed the laptop and turned off the lights, leaving the apartment in darkness. I knew exactly what happened next in the automated workflow of a defaulted loan held by a private entity. I didn't need to make a call or send a text. The system I had just engaged would do the work for me. The next morning, a tow truck rolled into Cedar Ridge, and for the first time in my life, my parents couldn't erase what they'd done. The notification came through just before lunch, vibrating against the mahogany surface of the conference table, where I was leading a weekly threat assessment meeting. It wasn't a text from my family, but a direct message on Instagram from a woman named Sarah, a former neighbor who still lived 3 houses down from my parents in Cedar Ridge. We hadn't spoken in 5 years, but small-town curiosity travels faster than fiber optics. The message had no text, just a video file. I excused myself, stepping out into the hallway, where the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Denver skyline. My hands were steady, but my stomach turned over as I pressed play. The video was shaky, shot vertically from behind a living room curtain. It showed the familiar curve of Maple Street, gray and overcast. A massive flatbed tow truck was backed diagonally into my parents' driveway, its diesel engine rumbling with a low, aggressive growl that distorted the phone's microphone. The target was the lifted black Chevrolet Silverado. It looked ridiculous and hulking against the modest suburban backdrop, a symbol of status that my brother couldn't afford and my father couldn't cover. I watched as the driver, a large man in a high-visibility vest, hooked the chains to the front axle. Then the audio spiked. My father, Eric, burst out of the front door. He wasn't wearing his church suit. He was in sweatpants and a windbreaker, looking smaller and older than I remembered. He was waving his arms, screaming over the sound of the winch. "Stop! You can't take that. My daughter is handling this. This is a mistake." His voice cracked on the word mistake. I held the phone closer to my ear. The driver didn't even look up from his controls. He just shouted back, flat and bored, "You'll need to talk to your lender, sir. Step back from the vehicle." The winch tightened, the truck's suspension groaned, and the front tires lifted off the asphalt. In the background of the shot, I saw movement in the windows of the house next door. The neighbors were watching. The curtain dropped and the video ended. Before I could process, the image of my father begging a repo man to stop my mother's texts began to arrive. They weren't asking what happened. They were commands. She sent a blurry photo of the truck half loaded onto the flatbed. "They're taking Ryan's truck," she wrote. "Your father is furious. He's shaking, Chloe. Please fix this before he does something he can't take back. Call the bank right now." I stared at the screen. There was no apology. There was no acknowledgement that they had ignored my email stating I wasn't paying. There was only the assumption that I was the fixer, the one who existed solely to smooth over the rough edges of their reality. They didn't care that I had said no. They only cared that the consequences had actually arrived. Then came the second wave, the public fallout. In a town like Cedar Ridge, news doesn't spread. It explodes. Someone, maybe Sarah, maybe another neighbor, had posted a clip to the local community Facebook group. I pulled it up on my phone. The caption read, "Greene's getting repoed on Maple. Guess the economy is hitting everyone." The comments were already rolling in a digital pillory. One user, a woman who went to my parents' church, wrote, "Always preaching about prosperity and blessings. Guess all that church talk didn't pay the bills." Another defended them. "Y'all are hateful. Everyone falls on hard times. You don't know their story." But they didn't know the story. They didn't know that the hard times were a result of buying a $40,000 toy for a 24-year-old dropout. I felt a strange, corrosive mix of satisfaction and deep, burning shame. In America, financial failure is treated like a moral leprosy. My parents had spent their lives curating an image of middle-class perfection, and I had just detonated it in the driveway for everyone to see. I walked back into my office, but I couldn't focus. I sat in my ergonomic chair, surrounded by the hum of high-end servers and the chatter of my team, laughing about lunch plans outside my glass door. They had no idea that the calm, professional woman running their department had just orchestrated the public humiliation of her own flesh and blood. That was the hardest pill to swallow. I hadn't just let this happen. I had bought the debt. I had signed the order. I had weaponized the very system I protected my clients from. I wondered, staring at the muted video playing on a loop, if that made me a villain. Or did it just make me the first person in the Greene family history who refused to be stepped on? The afternoon dragged on a blur of meaningless emails. Then at 3:30, the phone on my desk rang. It was the security desk in the lobby 30 floors down. "Ms. Greene," the guard asked, "I have 3 people here asking for you. They don't have an appointment, but they say they're your parents and your brother. They're quite upset." My blood ran cold. I stood up, gripping the edge of the desk. They were in Oregon this morning. They must have driven straight to the airport the second the truck was taken, maxed out a credit card for last-minute flights, and come here to corner me. They had flown 1,000 miles not to apologize, but to ambush me on my own turf. They thought that by showing up at my workplace in front of my colleagues, they could shame me into submission. They wanted a scene. "Ms. Greene," the guard repeated, "do you want me to turn them away?" I looked out at my team. I looked at the life I had built, the one that didn't include them. If I sent them away, they would scream in the lobby. They would make sure everyone knew. "No," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Send them up, but don't bring them to my office. Put them in the small conference room near the elevators." I hung up. I smoothed my blouse, checked my reflection in the monitor, and saw a hardness in my eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. If they wanted a confrontation, they were about to get one, not with the daughter they remembered, but with the version of me they'd spent years trying to erase. The conference room was a fishbowl, a sleek box of glass and brushed steel located right off the main corridor. As I approached, I could see them through the transparent walls. My coworkers were walking past, heads down, pretending not to look, but I knew they were clocking every second of the drama unfolding inside. The scene was staged like a grotesque parody of a board meeting. My father, Eric, had taken the seat at the head of the table, sitting there with the presumptive authority of a man who believes he owns every room he walks into. Ryan was pacing the length of the small room, his jaw tight, his hands balling into fists at his sides. My mother, Patty, sat to my father's right, clutching her purse to her chest, like a shield, her eyes rimmed red. I swiped my badge to open the door. The magnetic lock clicked, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I stepped inside and let the door seal shut behind me. I didn't sit down. Eric didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He pointed a shaking finger at the empty chair opposite him. "We need to talk about what you've done to this family," he said, his voice low and vibrating with suppressed rage. "I knew you were selfish, Chloe. I knew you were distant. But this is cruel. It's insane." He leaned forward, placing his palms on the table. "You have threatened our stability. You have threatened our standing in the church. You have humiliated us in front of the entire town." "I haven't done anything to you," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I refuse to pay for a truck I don't own. I refuse to cover a debt I didn't sign for. That isn't a threat, Dad. That's a boundary." "It's technicalities," Ryan snapped, stopping his pacing to glare at me. "You have the money. We know you do. You just wanted to see me fail." Patty spoke up, then her voice trembling. "The bank. When your father called them, they said the loan was sold." They said it was transferred to a company called Frontier Signal LLC. She looked at me, confusion warring with suspicion. Is that connected to you? Did you tell them to do that? I looked at them, the three people who shared my DNA, but none of my reality. I didn't flinch. I didn't tell them to do anything. I bought it. Frontier Signal is my company. I own your loan. The silence that followed was absolute. It sucked the air out of the room. Ryan looked like he'd been slapped. Eric's face went from red to a pale waxen gray. You, Ryan sputtered, taking a step toward me before stopping. You bought it. You bought my debt just to ambush us. You sacrificed your own family just to humiliate us. No, I cut in, my voice sharpening. I stopped sacrificing myself so you could dodge responsibility. There is a difference. How could you? Patty whispered, tears finally spilling over. We are your family. Are we? I asked. I walked over to the whiteboard wall, where a faint ghost of a network diagram was still visible from a previous meeting. I turned back to face them. You erased me, Mom. You erased me from Christmas. You erased me from the photos. You stopped telling stories about me at church because my life didn't fit your narrative. You only remember I exist when a bill shows up that you can't pay. You don't get to erase me as a daughter and still draft me as your insurance policy. We never erased you, Eric argued, though his eyes wouldn't meet mine. You're busy. You have your own life. I do, I said. And you have no idea what that life is. I reached into my bag and pulled out a magazine I'd been saving. It was an industry quarterly featuring a profile on Denver's top cybersecurity leads. I slid it across the table. It landed in front of Eric. The headline included the valuation of my department and a mention of my recent promotion, along with my salary band and stock options numbers that were public knowledge in my field, but astronomical to them. You always called my job computer nonsense, I said. You told the neighbors I worked in IT support because you didn't understand it. Read it. Eric looked down. Ryan peered over his shoulder. I watched the realization hit them. They saw the numbers. They saw the respect the industry had for me. For the first time, they were seeing the scale of my success, not as something vague, but as a concrete, terrifying reality. They realized I wasn't just scraping by. I had surpassed them. You, Patty whispered, looking up from the page. You never told us. You never asked, I replied. You were too busy telling me how much you'd sacrificed for Ryan's travel ball, or his truck, or his mistakes. Eric pushed the magazine away, as if it were radioactive. He stood up, trying to regain his physical dominance. Fine, you have money. Congratulations. If you have so much, then this is easy. You write it off. You forgive the loan right now, transfer the title to your brother, and we put this behind us. You do this like a good daughter, and we can move past this ugliness. I looked at him standing there in his windbreaker, demanding my submission one last time. He genuinely thought that because he was my father, he could command my assets. No, I said. Excuse me. I said no. You made adult choices. You signed a contract. Now you are dealing with consequences. I won't step between you and reality anymore. I placed my hands on the table, leaning in so I was eye level with him. Right now in this room, I am not your daughter. I am your creditor. That is who you turned me into. If you walk away from us over this, Eric snarled, the mask of the patriarch crumbling to reveal just a desperate, angry man. You will regret it. We won't be your parents anymore. You will have no one. You're dead to me, Ryan spat, grabbing his jacket. I don't want your help. I hope you rot in this glass box. Patty just sat there, weeping, torn between the husband she obeyed and the daughter she had lost. You already erased me. I told them, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. I'm just finally acting like someone who knows she's gone. They stormed out. Ryan kicked the door open, Eric marched through without looking back, and Patty followed like a ghost. I stood alone in the conference room, the silence rushing back in to fill the void they left. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I looked at the empty chairs, the discarded magazine, and the glass walls that separated me from the rest of the world. I had won the argument. I had asserted my power. But as the adrenaline faded, I was left with a cold, hollow question echoing in my mind. What did I just become? The days following the confrontation in the conference room were not defined by shouting matches or frantic phone calls, but by the cold, inexorable machinery of the financial system. I did not contact my parents directly. I didn't block their numbers, but I didn't use them either. Instead, I let Frontier Signal LLC take the lead. I logged into the business portal and initiated the standard collection workflow. The software generated the letters, automatically printing them on crisp, impersonal letterhead that bore no trace of my handwriting or my voice. The first letter was an itemized statement of the balance, including the accrued interest and the legal fees associated with the purchase of the note. It offered a settlement option: pay the principal in full within 10 days to avoid further legal escalation. I signed it with a digital stamp, authorized representative. I mailed it to the house on Maple Street, the same house where I had once learned to ride a bike, treating it exactly like any other delinquent account in a stack of thousands. I watched the process unfold from a distance, piecing together the wreckage through the sporadic factual texts my mother sent. She didn't plead anymore. She just reported, perhaps hoping that if she showed me their suffering, I would crack. I learned that Eric had gone to the bank the day after the meeting. He had to cash out a significant portion of his 401k to generate the liquidity needed to settle the debt. He took the early withdrawal penalty, a financial hit that I knew would set his retirement plans back by at least 2 years. Then came the update about Ryan. He had been forced to list his high-end gaming setup, his tools, and even the dirt bike he'd bought last summer on Facebook Marketplace. My mother texted me a photo of Ryan's empty room, the desk bare, the walls stripped of posters. He is selling everything, she wrote. Your father says these are predatory lending tactics. I stared at the message, noting the bitter irony. They hated the system now. They hated the rules. But they had loved the system when they thought it allowed them to sign a paper, take a truck, and let the invisible daughter worry about the fallout. They hated the system only when they couldn't use it to erase their mistakes. I had simply refused to be the eraser this time. The silence from the family was replaced by a low hum of noise from Cedar Ridge. A cousin I rarely spoke to, a quiet girl named Jessica, who had always felt like an outsider too, called me late one night. She told me the gossip had metastasized. The Greens were no longer the pillars of the community, the perfect family in the front pew. They were those people now. The sight of the tow truck and the subsequent rumors about debt collectors had shattered their carefully curated reputation. Jessica told me that during the post-service coffee hour, people stopped talking when my parents approached. There were whispers about financial ruin, about secret bankruptcies. Some people defended them, saying it was a tragedy. Others, the ones who had secretly resented Eric's pious posturing for years, whispered, maybe if they hadn't babied that boy so much, this wouldn't have happened. I felt the weight of that. My actions hadn't just settled a score. They had rippled outward, dismantling the social standing my father valued more than his own bank account. Then the story breached the containment of the town. A few days later, while scrolling through a forum on a sleepless night, I found it. It was an anonymized post on a popular revenge subreddit, clearly written by someone who knew the details. Maybe Ryan, maybe a neighbor. The title was, Sister Bought Her Parents' Debt and Had Her Brother's Truck Repossessed to Prove a Point. I read the comments with a detached fascination. The internet strangers were split down the middle. Half of them called the sister, me, a monster, a sociopath who chose money over blood. The other half hailed me as a hero of boundaries, someone who finally stopped the cycle of enabling. I realized then that I could never look to the outside world for validation. There was no consensus on the right level of revenge. I had to live with myself, not with the comments section. 2 weeks after the initial demand letter, a wire transfer hit the Frontier Signal business account. It was the full settlement amount. The notification pinged on my phone while I was making coffee. It was just numbers on a screen. There was no confetti, no sense of triumph. I logged in, marked the account as satisfied, and generated the final letter, confirming the discharge of the debt. I closed the file. It was just another case number in an archive now. That evening my phone rang. It was Patty. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice was hollow, stripped of the frantic energy she'd had in my office. She sounded aged. "The money is sent," she said. "I know. I received the confirmation." "Your father." She paused and I could hear her breathing a ragged, uneven sound. "Your father says we don't have a daughter anymore. He says you chose to be a stranger, so that's what you are." I looked out the window at the city lights of Denver, feeling a strange lightness, like a tether had finally been cut. "He hasn't treated me like a daughter in years, Mom. He had a resource, he had a backup plan. Now the resource is gone." "Is that all we were to you?" she asked, a faint spark of anger trying to catch fire and failing. "Is that all I was to you?" I countered. "An empty chair at the table and a full bank account when you needed it." There was a long silence. I thought she had hung up. Then, barely audible, she spoke again. "I'm ashamed." "You should be," I said, thinking of the truck. "No," she interrupted, her voice breaking. "Not of the truck. I'm ashamed of that photo. I'm ashamed that we sat there eating dinner knowing you weren't there, and we posted it anyway because it was easier to pretend we were perfect than to admit we needed you." She took a breath that sounded like a sob. "I'm ashamed of how we chose our comfort over you, and I don't know if we can ever fix it." I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, stunned into silence. I had expected anger. I had expected guilt. I hadn't expected the truth. I didn't know if it was manipulation or the first honest thing she had said to me in a decade. I didn't say anything back. I just listened to the static on the line, wondering if this was the end of the story or the terrible quiet beginning of a new one. The silence on the line stretched out heavy and fragile until my mother broke it again. Her voice was softer this time, stripped of the frantic entitlement that had defined our interactions for as long as I could remember. She didn't ask for money. She didn't demand an apology. "I won't ask for forgiveness," she said, her words halting. "Maybe we don't deserve it. But someday, maybe a long time from now, could we meet somewhere neutral? Just us. No bills. No trucks. Just to hear who you are now. Because I realize I don't actually know." I held the phone against my ear, looking at the reflection of my own eyes in the darkened window. For years I had desperate, clawing dreams about them asking to see me, really see me. Now that the offer was here, born from the ashes of their humiliation, I didn't feel the rush of gratitude I expected. I felt a cool, measured distance. I realized I held the keys to the gate now. "If I ever want that too," I told her, keeping my voice even, "I'll let you know." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a rejection. It was simply a statement that the timeline was now mine to dictate. I hung up before she could say anything else. The months that followed were defined by a strange, stabilizing calm. The chaos of the Greene family drama, which had been the background radiation of my life for a decade, simply evaporated. My life in Denver expanded to fill the space where their demands used to be. I took on lead roles in 2 massive security audits at work. I spent my weekends hiking the trails in the Rockies, breathing air that felt thinner and cleaner. I started going to trivia nights with my team, actually laughing instead of checking my phone for crisis texts. I even started seeing someone, a kind, grounded guy I met at my climbing gym, who had no idea what a repossession order looked like, and who listened to my stories without waiting for a punchline or a loan request. My phone still sat on my nightstand, but its character had changed. There were no sudden vibrations at midnight, no frantic texts about emergencies that were really just bad budgeting. The only communication I received from Cedar Ridge came in the form of sporadic, benign texts from Patty. "Crazy weather here today," she would write, or "Saw a bird feeder I thought you'd like." They were tentative pings, like sonar pulses sent into the dark to see if anything was still out there. I rarely replied, and when I did, it was just a thumbs up. I was training them and myself to exist in a world where our connection wasn't transactional. Late one night in early autumn, I found myself sitting on the rooftop terrace of my building, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the grid of city lights sprawl out toward the mountains. I started taking a mental inventory of the fire I'd started. I had ambushed my family with a system they didn't understand. I had threatened their illusion of being good parents far more than I had threatened their finances. I had sacrificed the hope of ever being the good daughter in order to ensure I didn't have to sacrifice myself anymore. It was a steep price. I forced myself to be honest in the dark. There had been a moment watching that shaky video of the tow truck backing into the driveway where I felt a hard, bright flash of satisfaction. It wasn't just justice, it was vengeance. It was the thrill of finally being the one with the boot on the neck. That part of me was real. I couldn't unknow it. I wasn't just the victim who got away. I was the operator who struck back. I had to live with that complexity. I thought about the American stories I was raised on, the contradictions that played out in every living room in Cedar Ridge. Family is everything, they told us. Take care of your own. But they also preached, stand on your own 2 feet. You make your bed, you lie in it. I realized then that my parents had weaponized the first 2 slogans to avoid ever having to face the third. They used family as a shield against their own incompetence. My revenge wasn't just about the money. It was about forcing all of them and myself to actually live the American creed they claimed to believe in. I had forced them to stand on their own 2 feet, even if I had to kick the crutch out from under them to make it happen. I closed my eyes and let my mind wander forward, imagining a day years from now. I pictured a knock on my apartment door. I saw Eric, Patty, and Ryan standing on the threshold. They looked older, worn down by the friction of a life without a safety net. They weren't holding invoices or legal letters. Their hands were empty. They were just 3 people asking if the ledger between us could be rewritten. In my mind, the scene played out 3 different ways. In the first version, I look at them, feel the old anger rise like bile, and slam the door in their faces, leaving them in the hallway. In the second, I step back, invite them in, and forgive everything, pretending the scars aren't there for the sake of having people to call my own. In the third, I sit them down at my table and read out loud the full account of every time they tried to erase me, forcing them to acknowledge the history before we can build a future. I didn't know which ending I would choose. I didn't know which version of me would answer that door, the one who still hurts, or the one who finally healed. Maybe it would be both. But that's a story for another day. For now, the file is closed. They erased me from Christmas. They sent me the bill for my brother's truck. I bought their debt and told the bank to repossess it. Some people say I became the villain of this story. Others say I was the only one who finally drew a line in the sand. I don't mind being the villain in their version of events as long as I'm the hero in mine. If the day comes when my parents show up, not with another bill, but with their pride laid down and their hands empty, do I open the door, or do I keep it closed to protect the life I built the day I finally stopped letting them erase me? That is the only question left on the balance sheet. Chloe finally found her peace on that rooftop, but the question of forgiveness remains unanswered. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Let us know in the comments if she should open that door or keep it locked forever. We read every single comment of your thoughts. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you for listening. This has been a story from Radiance. We'll see you next time.